Welcome everybody to this year's virtual Witch Camp. My name is Raquel Natalicchio and I am one of the founders of Modern Witch Movement. Modern Witch Movement is a platform that was founded to provide community resources, gatherings, and inspire a deepening connection to nature, community, and the magic that is you. Today's panel discussion will be on the topic of witch ethics, and I'm joined by an incredible group of panelists that I'm honored to introduce to you. Okay, so our beautiful and magical panel includes Barbara Bain, beaming in from Santa Barbara. Barbara Bain is an Indigenous dreamworker and decolonial psychologist. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you.
We have Zena Edwards, beaming in from London, UK.
Hi. Hello.
Zena is a poet, an art activist, and a tarot reader.
Hi, nice to be here.
Hi. Thank you for being here. We have the wonderful Emakhet Ra, beaming in from Portland, Oregon. She is an ordained minister, founder of Archaic Revival and Dream Council. Welcome.
Greetings.
We have Nina Kawasaki, beaming in from Sacramento, California. Nina is a community leader, Ignite Festival producer, and martial artist. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
And last but not least, our honorary man witch, Scott Froschauer, beaming in from Los Angeles. He is an experimental artist whose artwork has been shown in the Smithsonian Museum and several times at Burning Man. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, everybody. So today we're talking about ethics. Defining ethics. Ethics is a moral practice that governs our behavior. And very much like witchcraft, it is self-crafted. You know, the things that we consider our own morals and our own ethics are crafted in the same way as to how we connect to the craft of magic. So there's a couple of things that have been passed down, like the Witch's Creed and the Rule of Three, that have kind of given some, I would say, like a trash fence, like a kind of like a barrier for us to hold still, and that's harm none, do what you will, and whatever you put out into the world, you get 3 times over. So with that in mind, when we're thinking about hexes, which is going to be the first thing I just dive into, just to get that one right out of the way. When we're thinking about hexes and what we're putting out and then what we're receiving, what are your thoughts on hexing and that energy in general?
Does anybody start?
Yeah.
I gotta
go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
Well, just I think that there's an interesting thought about creative versus destructive energies. One thing that's come up oftentimes, a lot of the work I do involves burning large-scale effigies, and many people will view that as a destructive force. And when they're thinking of projecting a hex onto something, they're thinking, oh, if I build that thing which I wish to not see and then tear it down or burn it, for example, that will be a mode for disempowering it. And my experience is actually the opposite. If you build the thing, you are empowering it. If you, and by gathering energy to it, you are empowering it. So I often think about always attempting to find the constructive angle first, because for me, the destructive angle empowers that thing. You're still putting energy into that thing that you're attempting to disempower, if all of that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you just see that out in the world, you know, that, you know, the more, you know, politics first comes into mind, but, you know, there are political figures who, you know, as they try to prevent things, all they do is create more attention to it. And, you know, so you can see it just in everyday life, how that works. Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes the threat of a hex alone is very effective, even if you don't actually make one. Like I think of the Romani witches who, back in the day in Romania, the politicians were attempting to tax them on their witchcraft, and they threatened to hex the politicians. And by doing that, the politicians didn't tax them. Weird things started happening at night, and they were so afraid of the hex that they left them alone. And so I think part of that stigma around witchcraft and our ability to curse, even if we don't, helps us defend. It gives us defense against being taken advantage of, and it's part of our reputation that actually helps protect us in some ways, even if we don't do it.
I agree. Yeah.
I think what's interesting about that is there's a sort of contract that's made between the hexer and the hexie, that there's a belief system that there is this magic in the world, and that, you know, if you believe yourself to be an entity that can channel that, and the other person believes that also, then that's what makes it real,
Right.
as well, I think. So I'm thinking about that from a storyteller's perspective, from a poet's perspective. You know, sometimes I believe poetry is spells. I've always believed that when I'm on stage, I'm creating a community moment where we're all believing in the moment at that time. But I can only do so much writing. And then once I let the poem go, it's up to the audience about what it means to them. So there's work that they do. And I think that's the kind of contract that's agreed, like, you know, that there's a magic that's there. And we make an agreement that it exists, and that's what makes it real as well.
Yeah, and there's really a question of, are you willing to bargain your energy? Like, are you willing to give that energy away if you're going to hex someone? Is it worth it for you to invest in that belief system yourself? Because it will come back around to you. So is it worth it?
And I think that there are a lot of traditions in the ancient wise women ways that really don't include hexing at all. And so I really am aligned with that form of, you know, going back to the original idea that we've talked about before of sage femme, or, you know, the wise woman, and where we are rooted into a realm of pre-Christian ideas where we are in relationship with nature. And so as more, I would say, of a green witch, and more in the wise women ways, in those ways and in those traditions, hexing is not a part of our tradition. It is not a part of being in the light, and it is not a part of serving the well-being of all. And so in the wise women ways that I practice, we consider hexing to just be not part of our tradition at all, and more in a way of sorcery and in dark magic.
I'm curious from the green witch's perspective around like homeopathy and poisonous plants and plants that are utilized in small amounts for medicine. Like, how would that relate with the idea of hexing, do you feel?
Yeah, I feel like the two are completely different. One is honoring nature and recognizing and being in relationship with the idea that in nature, there's always the poison, and then there's the medicine for that poison. And the two in the natural world often exist side by side in the same environment, you know, and so in that way, we're able to access both and acknowledge both. There may be ways that a medicinal, something that would be considered a poisonous and kind of a death deal in one sense, can also be medicine in a homeopathic sense. And then nearby, there is always the healing remedy for that. And so I think in that space, you know, when we acknowledge that, we also acknowledge that there's balance in nature. But to actually put something, some kind of darkness or ill form onto another being or anything in the world, I learned in my original teachings with wise women and midwives in particular, that if we send something in an ill will of any form, it doesn't just come back on us threefold, it comes back on us tenfold. So we just, the intention is always to remain in the healingness.
I mean, the bottom line is hexing is a laziness. Ultimately, it takes great strength to be able to rise above what it is that you're attacking, and to find another way around it, another way around that problem. I come to a lot of this through martial arts. You learn to fight, obviously, in martial arts, but a true martial artist will approach a problem by trying to diffuse it and trying to bring balance and calm to the situation first. Because knowing that you can fight through it allows you the confidence to be able to deal with the situation. But a true somebody who is really practicing the way will approach it as using their voice, their intelligence, the strength of their inner light to fix a problem rather than just beat it over the head with a stick or whatever, or karate chop it, whatever. So
yeah, I agree. And it seems that if we go back to the old religion, pre-Christianity, which was really, thousands of years ago, that it's important to acknowledge that, healing is the root of witchcraft, ultimately. And whereas bringing ill upon another or another thing in any way is sorcery, and is often associated more with dark magic. Yeah. So I think in traditional witchcraft, there's a clear dividing line there. Yeah. And I love the idea that we remain if we're truly resourceful as witches, then we are sourcing that which is in alignment with creation and the love of creation. And in that place, we have infinite power of creation rather than calling on the forces of destruction. And which doesn't mean like something like Scott, your words. If you're burning an effigy, that's not necessarily a destruction. I mean, to burn things in the wise women ways is a way to release the spirit of something.
And I think that's how people get confused by that.
Yeah. And so it's not destruction. It's alchemy that creates something greater.
Well, destruction and creation in one way are two wings of the same bird. Like you have to, by destroying something, you're creating something else. And that's alchemy. It's transforming through energy, one thing to another thing. So you can't really divide them because they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I think it depends on our relationship, with those two sides of the coin. Which ones are we using to conjure and create with? Are we using destruction, or are we using the love and creation and healing?
So one of the questions that I got from our audience early in the week was, when learning about the craft, how, especially through the internet and through social media, how do we ensure that we're both educating ourselves and sharing truthful and correct information?
That's a difficult one. I think.
And I found that by myself.
Know thyself comes in here, and learning first how to create a direct connection with source or with creation as a fundamental practice, so that you know the difference when you're in alignment or when you're not in alignment. So that way you can measure with that alignment whether that is true for you or not.
But even something that might feel truthful to you, it may not actually be the reality of that subject matter. Like, for example, when I was doing a lot of research on Freya, on the goddess, I saw so many different ways of understanding her, of learning about her. And so I could go based off of what felt right for me, but ultimately what is like the truthful information, or like, like how do we really get to the heart of it?
Well, is there one objective truth, or are the gods and goddesses subjective? in that way. I mean, it poses a greater philosophical question, I suppose.
Yes.
Do the gods evolve with us in the way that we form relationships with them, or do they have an objective personality?
Well, and I think that evolution is a really important part of it too. That that you might be holding on to a particular truth in this moment, but having the ability to let go of that truth and recognize that you can grow, that your knowledge isn't in stasis, and that you can respond. And I think that's, you know, I mean, for me, growth is key to that. So, you know, believing in the moment I'm in right now, but also believing that this has displaced those previous moments as well. So I might end up needing to move away from this, and I might need to hear new information. I might need to hear new perspectives to grow from here. So I think evolution's, you know, critical to that.
Well, and that's why we keep books of shadows and that kind of thing, and we keep track of what we do, and we actually practice so that we learn and see what works and what doesn't, what the outcomes are of what we do. Even when we're being positive about things, you know, trying to help people, sometimes it has a way of backfiring if you're not careful with it, not giving it careful thought. And that's what that's all about, is to learn how, you know, is to put it out in the world and see. And so to have an open mind to be able to adjust, just because I keep reading that you're supposed to do it this way, if it's not working for you, then, you know, if it's not creating positive outcomes, then change. And so having that open mind and being flexible, being like water, is very important.
Yeah, and I feel that it's our part of our role, if we are to call ourselves witches in the sacred sense, and identify with that term, that we are constantly learning and amending what we think we know, and also locating our source of what we know in terms of who we are in the world, and our location in the world. Like you know, like in terms of what is my privilege in the world, and how am I claiming that? And how am I working with that for the good, you know, to improve the world and for the good of all, and also to understand for myself that truth is situated in our personal experience, and in our existence. And so we have to first, you know, claim whatever we perceive to be a truth as first and foremost our own, and to not make the assumption that that's a shared truth with someone else or anything else in the world. And so having a constant reflexive relationship with ourselves and with the world, I think, is critical to learning and understanding how to be in the world in a good way with all things. And to me, that's part of our role, is to be in relationship.
Molly, do I need to go to Facebook?
So
Can I have a question?
I was curious, Zena, about your perspective as a storyteller around that.
Actually, I wanted to kind of reflect it back a question actually. Just, there's definitely a truth that you find based on dealing with all of your shadow work, and seeing, you know, talking about, like as Nina said, what works for you. But what about the collective? What about when groups and communities and collectives and movements have shadow work to do, and how these, you know, how our orishas or deities or goddesses and gods, you know, how they work for people on a collective level? I'm kind of curious to expand on, have that expanded upon, because I know we can speak from our individual perspective, and my own personal exploration via tarot, and doing some deep shadow work has been really helpful for me to find what works for, which aligns actually with my experience of spirit and my ancestors. And so I'm curious about how, when we're talking from a collective perspective, I'd like to hear people's perceptions on that, ideas on that.
Interesting. Well, you know, something that Barbara said, it just reminded me, and I'm not sure if I'm going to answer the question fully, but something that I've been working on a lot lately. You know, we've had a lot of, obviously, you know, racial injustice is a big issue finally in this country, and I just posted something last night about, you know, just trying to walk in other people's shoes and understand where they come from, and I think that's very important as a healer, as you know, to take on the responsibility of being a healer. You have to understand who it is that is around you. So it's important. Our community is everybody on this planet. You know, our community is bigger than just the people that are right around us, and so I think it's important to be able to. The message I've been bringing out lately is that if everybody is upset, there's a reason why they're upset. You need to listen to that. You need to understand that. You need to hear that. You know, walking in other people's shoes is a very important part of being a good healer, and understanding what the pain is. What people say is not always what is actually the underlying problem, and I think it's important to wash yourself in other people's emotions sometimes, and we have the opportunity to do that, being more sensitive to that. You know, I'm not really sure if that answers the question, but that's the thing the thread I've been on lately.
Yeah. And how that will actually inform how your practice works for you.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yeah.
Something that comes up for me is around, you know, our great witchy mother Starhawk, and what she says. She says magic is the stories that we tell ourselves, and feeling into mythology, modern day mythology and storytelling, and how that informs the zeitgeist all around the world, but also in affinity groups and in groups of people who identify in certain ways. And the power of being storytellers. And as dreamers, our dreams give us the opportunity to have a direct relationship with deity, with mythology, with archetypes. And when we share those stories with our communities and with our affinity groups, we're creating mythology for our time. And it gives us a direct relationship, like we were talking about earlier, to understand our subjective truth around the nature of these deities or archetypes and how they're living in us today. And so that's why I feel dream work is so important to do and to share in community and in council form, so that we can create these modern myths that are based on these collective archetypes that have existed since the beginning of human time. But as far as, and to be storytellers and to share our stories as mythology, because this is the basic mode of transmitting ethics in human culture. And so where do we see, what myths, modern myths do we engage with today, and how is that magically affecting us if these are the stories that we're telling ourselves, you know?
Yeah, and I will also echo that importance, that I feel it's actually critical that we at this time, especially in the scope of what is happening on our planet collectively, and globalism, because we're not just individuals in small communities anymore. We are literally joined at the global level right now. And so to listen into what is coming through us at that deeply personal level through our dreams, and the dream, that's my work in the world also, is I work with people, individuals and community, doing dream work. And so when we are connected with primary source, sacred source, which is always readily available to us through dream and imagination, active imagination, meditation, all forms of dreaming. My dream work teacher says that the body is always dreaming. We're never not in a state of being in relationship with that world. It's really a question of what is the quality of relationship that we have with all of that information coming in. and how is it informing our realities, and then how are we taking that in terms of action into the world, in order to heal our communities and in order to be a positive influence in the world and to take positive action in the world. And I would define positive action as action that is for the good of all, which is one of the foundational ethics of being a witch, is that it be for the good of all. And if it's not for the good of all, then I think that the ethic that we're working with is in question and should be questioned. And so, especially if, like, so I do community dream matrices. So I get groups of people into a shared room. We arrange ourselves into a spiral, and we literally, without judgment, speak our dreams into a shared environment so that we understand what's happening in the unconscious of the community. And we get to know where dreamers are dreaming with each other, where the dream images themselves are in relationship in the dream world, and then how that is working through us at the community level. And from that information, then we can take that into and make actions, community action based on primary source of what is coming from the world of the sacred or the dream world. And that's kind of like next leveling it. That's like archetypal activism, right?
That's beautiful. Sorry, you want to say something, Scott?
Well, it's just the notion of tapping into the unconscious of the community, which, thinking of something like empathy, right? So empathy, if the generation of empathy is the spell, if that is the intent, how to manifest additional empathy within the world, then starting at, as above, so below, starting within the self, how do I generate empathy within myself? How do I then multiply that empathy out to the community? How do I replicate those same mechanisms that I'm utilizing within myself? And how do I replicate those out into the community? And that's, to me, it's that recognition of what is the unconscious of the community. What is going on? What are the archetypes that they connect with? What is the archetypes I connect with, and how do those replicate in the community? And then how do I harness, how do I utilize those unconscious thoughts, those archetypes, all of those systems that are in play, and how do I invest empathy into those pre-existing systems? So my work as an artist is to then take those pre-existing systems that are already operating at a subconscious level in the community and hijack them to carry new messages and carry messages of empathy where they might have been carrying messages of, marketing, for instance, will carry a message of incompletion. You smell, buy deodorant. You're incomplete. You need to buy this product. Hijack that message that marketing's using and put a new payload in it. The new payload is empathy rather than buy deodorant. And but that thought of having an understanding of the self and what are my unconscious mechanisms, what are my archetypes, what are my systems, and then trying to map that onto the community's unconscious and the community's archetypes and their systems. I thought that really resonated what you were saying about, the unconsciousness of the community.
Yeah, and I think also there's something about sparking, reigniting the collective imagination outside of the constructs that we know and understand. These are all crashing down right now, and this is such a brilliant space of an opportunity for us to sort of like spark a spiritual imagination as well. I think that's one of the things that's been missing. Just what you were saying, Scott, we are sold brands. Our identity comes through the stuff that we buy, and that creates further and further apart from our relationship, our human connectivity relationship to each other and to the earth, because stuff just falls out of the sky as far as kids are concerned. They don't realize it actually comes from the earth. I'm generalizing completely there, but you get my point. So I think imagining outside of the constructs, that imagining outside of the stuff, and knowing that our own life energy, our own life force, our own vitality, and our connection to each other is what makes it worth being here on this planet. And I think, just the idea of doing the dream work, where we are actually using that to spark the collective imagination so that we can envisage and imagine a world beyond what we've seen for the last few centuries that has brought us to this point now. So I think, you know, the dream work is such crucial work. That's something I used to do as a child as well. I used to have incredible, vivid, graphic dreams, and I never understood where they came from. I was too small to, I don't know where they came from. But they came, and now they make sense. Now they make sense.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite games to play with kids, especially doing nightmare work, is to ask them if you could bring in any archetype or any character to help you with the conflict in your dream, who would it be and how would they help you? And what that reveals is an aspect oftentimes of their own nature that is being called in as an ally to help them resolve that conflict. And it's really fun. We can do that with adults, obviously, but with kids, it's really fun because they'll be like, oh, Spider-Man comes in and he shoots his web at the monster. Or, you know, they'll have like a superhero or like a T-Rex or something cool. And then we talk about that relationship with that guardian spirit, that guardian ally for them. And bear is a very classic one. You know, most kids have teddy bears, and bear is a wonderful guardian spirit in the dream time for children as a helper for this. But again, just kind of working in that archetypal subconscious language as well that children really understand, and that our inner children really understand, to help us to understand, to overstand those aspects of our own psyche that we can call forth to help us resolve conflict when we need to and come to resolution. It's part of what's so fun about the dream work as well.
This brings up a phrase for me that I think about often, and the phrase is dream the culture forward. And when I think it's an interesting addendum to the conversation we were having about hexes, about this notion of discovering what the constructive way forward from this moment is, because we're in such a moment right now of, I don't know, letting go. There's so much, we'll just call it chaos. There's so much, but imagining what, and being confident and moving forward towards a dreamed future. And how do we create that dream? What do we dream is the constructive future that we're moving towards? I personally have a journeying practice, and that's the whole focus of my journeying practice, is just to imagine what the culture looks like tomorrow. What is this culture that I'm dreaming forward, as opposed to what is the culture I'm trying to tear down? Yeah. It's what is the culture that I'm trying to dream. And it's you know, it's challenging to me that, you know, we were talking about, you know, maybe the laziness of hexing before. It's like the real work is in the imagining of the constructive future, and what does the constructive future look like, and how to put the energy into that that dream.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd also like to bring us back, you know, to old ways of being, or ancient ways of being. And I'm just getting ready to complete my PhD in depth psychology. And one of the things that I've studied is the indigenous landscape of California prior to contact by Europeans, and what actually existed here in California. And what I found in both interviews and the literature, was that California, the landscape of California, was so potent in its psychic abilities and in its dream, that dreams could be bought, sold, and traded. Yeah. And so if you think about the relationship that we have with the natural world, and also our psychic world, that which is other than human or more than human, it's changed significantly, you know, since then. But in those dreaming ways, original dreaming ways, entire societies were constructed. Nothing was done unless it was dreamt. And the political leaders of every tribe, almost every tribe, was also a dreamer. And so it's kind of like those two things go hand in hand. So, you know, the construction of the roundhouse, the feast, the dances, the ceremonies, the songs, the healing ways, all of it was dreamed in. And so with that, the dream actually literally became the foundation of constructed reality, daily reality and daily life, and the protocols with which people were guided.
It's amazing.
So it's not so far away that we can't get it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the first step really is connecting to dream. Like step one, let's start dreaming and having that conversation and building that relationship so that we can go into dream time and have that infinite space of creativity and trial and error. Well, there's no error, but, you know, to try different things and meet up with each other in there and try different things and come back out and be like, okay, this worked, this didn't work, let's try building this or that.
Mm-hmm.
And asking, like, what happens to a culture, what happens to a society when the society isn't dreaming anymore and we're not in touch with that aspect of our soul's language? And rather than putting a hex on someone in order to stop them from harming other people, encouraging them to become awakened to their own soul's language so they can do the necessary shadow work, like you were saying, Zena, to be able to integrate that work and be able to contribute from their soul into the culture in a healthy way.
Or the Burning Man culture uses the word default, that that the dreams are relegated to a preset default set of dreams, that these are the only dreams that are available, and breaking out of those preset default dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've already been constructed on a reality that serves a few, rather than, once again, a reality that serves everybody. Yeah.
So Barbara, you mentioned the potency of the land, specifically to California, which brings me to another question about sustainability within witchcraft. The rise of metaphysical shops and the popularity of, you know, having all the crystals and all the things. And I often wonder if we're reading the nutritional label on our tools, you know, really looking at where they come from. You know, are they being responsibly harvested by Indigenous people, and therefore we're supporting that community whom we're taking that medicine from, or borrowing or inspired to use that medicine from? Or the crystals, like, are we looking at, are they being mined through child labor? You know, like, there's all these things that we can buy the crystal, but we also have to do the work. We can't just buy the spirituality. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on all that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll preface my my comments by saying that I am an enrolled California Indian. I'm Shasta from Northern California. I'm also Native Hawaiian. And lots of Scots Irish. And so, you know, my primary identity, however, is as a California Native woman. And so in our traditions, you know, we really go back to source for our power. So, you know, we went into the natural world in order to gather the things that we needed as medicine. And that those were often, say, you know, in the Shasta Indian tradition, we would get our ahiki. It's called our ahiki. It's our spirit helper. And we could only do that by going into nature by ourselves and dreaming. And we could only receive that ahiki if it was given to us by the sacred world in union with the natural world and the spirited nature. And so I use that as an example because when we actually go out and gather our power directly from nature, we are honoring that original relationship with creation and as it stands in relationship with the inspirited earth that we live on. and that we're dependent on, and that in some ways now more than ever is dependent upon us, and our actions. So, this idea that we, I mean, I bought crystals, and, I find those things beautiful and amazing too. But, I've kind of pulled myself back from those practices because I realized that true personal power and true medicine is really about going out and respectfully gathering that for ourselves, and also asking for permission from whose ever territory that is. So, often, if you ask for permission from the local tribe or a local people or the owner of that land, most often permission is not going to be denied, because the simple act of asking for permission and jumping through all the hoops of finding who it is that I need to ask for permission, is that the local tribal leader, is that the local medicine person, kind of makes us hold on to, the urge to just go out and get. Instead, we learn something else in the process, something that's deeply respectful and deeply regarding of that place and the original people of that place. So, for example, Panther Meadows at Shasta, on Mount Shasta, is a very popular place where people go. And there's Shasta Spring there, which is one of the most sacred places for a whole collection of Native tribes living all around the mountain, including my own. But through the eclectic community that worships that place, people started to add crystals to the spring and put crystals in the spring. Well, when they did that over the years, they literally choked the spring to death. And so in our intention to do good, we've actually done harm. And if there was just a check-in with the local tribal leaders or the local medicine people before those actions were taken, don't take any action. Be with oneself, take action on behalf of oneself. But, when it comes to actually going into someone else's territory, then I think that there's a different protocol. So really what we've lost is the protocol. So in order to be ethical, I think no matter if we come from many different walks of life, it's about getting back to understanding what it means to be in respectful relationship with people and places. And then our power will naturally come to us. It will call to us, and we will follow that calling, and it will be true power. Medicine.
My mama used to say that medicine is in the relationship that we have with something, not in the thing itself.
Yeah.
And I also want to mention that there's a lot of other things besides sage that we can use. Like if you're growing your own rosemary, or you're growing your own basil, or, I think that we go to, for example, a metaphysical shop and we're told these are the things. And so then we feel like that's the thing that we have to use. But, using, like you said, like things that are in your immediate environment, and building that relationship and tending to them, to not just take from earth, but also, like plant that herb, take care of it, water it, talk to it, sing to it, and, then take and say thank you and use that and like build that relationship in a more personal way than just going to get it from like Whole Foods.
It's much stronger magic. Absolutely.
Yeah, a magic wand that we create by from what we've collected from nature respectfully is going to be way more powerful than a magic wand we just bought somewhere off the shelf, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say that I think what you said, Barbara, about the process is the important part. I think it's the being part in human being. It's the being present. When we look at nature and we look at animals, I mean, I learned so much about myself through owning a pet, through owning a cat, through owning my plants. That my cat is just being a cat. It's not there trying to be a cat. It doesn't go out and get cat things, and get its own catnip and say, look at me catting. We just, and I think this is the whole thing, getting back to that whole idea of the imagination resparking, just allowing ourselves to be present. And I love what you were saying about asking others before you go into other territories, because what you're actually asking is about what is the correct way, what is the ritual to be here, to get the knowledge that I need to get the healing that I need. What is it that I need to do to be here? And that's the learning, you know. So yeah, I think process and just being in the present, being a human being, not a human doing, as they say. I'm doing spirituality. I'm doing it now, you know.
Yeah. And it brings purpose to power.
Yeah.
You know, power can be wielded in all kinds of ways, but what kind of meaning and purpose does it contain when we've truly invested ourselves in what we gather at a spiritual level? It's a different quality of being.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the work that you put into any spell, but also any way of life, is where the magic happens.
Yeah, and I think when we're taught that if you have power, then you did something good or you did something right. And if you don't have power, then you didn't do something good or right. And we can see in the world today that there's many who have power who didn't necessarily do anything beneficial in order to have it. So our relationship with power and knowing what motivates us to have it is really key in witchcraft as well. And I think it draws a lot of us to it because we do see how powerful it is, but asking what is our motivation and intention for wielding it, and knowing that not everyone who has it necessarily did the right thing to get it either.
Well, there's that saying, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. The Peter Parker rule. But it's actually much older than that, and that's, you know, yes.
I need to get my phone charger, speaking of power. So I'll be right back. Plug into the source.
So I heard I was listening in on a conversation about cultural misappropriation, and there was this tender spot between sharing cultural inspiration and or just completely taking on that culture's practices and making them your own. Where's that double-edged sword for you, for all of you? I told you we were going to go deep on this.
I feel really well positioned to talk about this as a cultural appropriator, as someone who this goes back to this notion of evolution and this notion of you know, when you were talking about someone who might go buy their crystals and then discovering, oh, my process is maybe I should source them. You know, that evolution of discovering, oh, not just having the crystal is the important part. Oh, now I have discovered, I've now learned, I've evolved, and now understand that I need to understand the source and I need to understand the process by which it's gained and all of those sorts of things. You know, for myself, recognizing that the culture that I've lived in the majority of my life is completely appropriated, and living inside it, and then how to even recognize once you're inside it that it's appropriated. I think it's a challenge. This notion of honoring someone else's culture. You know, there's so much of that. You know, I mean, the great example is the people who are big into the football team, and they're like, oh, the reason it's called the Redskins is because we honor Native Americans with that. And holding on to that belief system of, oh, I'm participating in this, I'm wearing a Native headdress because I'm honoring it, and not recognizing what that means and what that appropriation is and what the position that the individual is in that's utilizing that symbology. And I've appropriated tons of culture through my life, and it's coming into contact with the recognition that it is appropriation. It comes as a shock, and it comes as a surprise, and it especially comes as a surprise when you imagine that you're someone who's enlightened and I pay attention to this kind of stuff. Yeah, I think as an appropriator, as a cultural appropriator, I think it's challenging to recognize it, for me to recognize it in myself, and it's challenging to get others to recognize when that's happening. And it goes back to needing to hear other voices, needing to have empathy, needing to understand what others are experiencing, and hearing their voices. That's what I have to add to it.
You're only really paying respect to another culture if you actually get to know it. Just imitating stereotypes that's not respect whatsoever.
Well, but I'll say very clearly that I know a great example is I know Haitian voodoo very well. I studied Haitian voodoo for a great period of my life. I know it very well. I can talk about it. I can get in a very well-versed understanding of it. I understand the rituals. I cannot utilize that symbology. I cannot utilize those symbols. I do not have connection to that source. That's appropriation. I think they're beautiful. I think the symbols are powerful. I know what the symbols mean. I know what their power is, but I do not have connection to that source. So to me, voodoo is a perfect example of that, of something that I was enamored by. I researched, I studied. I feel I followed that path of learning about that culture. I don't have access to that source. I don't have the right to utilize those symbols and that power. It's not mine to use.
Now, we as descendants of colonizers, many of us have also inherited a colonized way of thinking. And that way of thinking often includes, that's shiny and cool, I'll take it for myself. Yeah. And that even comes into play with something as simple as, in the green witchcraft of the way we gather plants. That's a beautiful flower, I'll just pick it. That's beautiful, I want to take it and possess it for myself. And so with that way of thinking, we appropriate cultural norms, cultural ways, because we think that can be a way of respecting it unconsciously. But I love the word appreciation. The word appreciation roots from the meaning to add value to. So when we're adding value and crediting a culture that inspires us, it's different than taking from that culture and claiming it as our own. And I love what Barbara is saying about asking permission first, asking permission. And that goes again hand in hand with even as simple as gathering herbs, to ask the plant first, is this okay if I have some of this? And you'll find sometimes that plant, you'll feel it'll say no. And then saying, okay, respect, thank you, and by acknowledging that it is a sovereign being that's not for yours for the taking, which that belief, I think, does root in Judeo-Christian thought of the world. The earth is there for us to subjugate and to just have whatever we want, whenever we want. So recognizing we are people of we're in this world, but we're people of the earth, and to ask permission first. And that when we do celebrate cultures, other cultures beyond those of our own origin, to appreciate them by adding value to them and discerning that difference.
I was part of this collective, and one of the things that one of our mentors spoke about was cultural appropriation happens if the subject that you're interacting with isn't you don't have a higher understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just consumed and it's not made more unfree, because you'll find a lot of these, obviously these faiths, religions, spiritual practices have been marginalized. And if they do not free them, as in even, how can I explain this? Bust them more wide open so that you have a deeper understanding about what they are and the value that they have. If it doesn't do that, then all you're doing is consuming. You're just consuming different. And I think that there is definitely a fine line between, okay, no disrespect, but I have to say this because it's like if you're adding value, it's about decentering yourself. It's not you adding the value. The value is already there. So it's when you're actually engaging with it, you are actually revealing how valuable it is and how ancient it is, that it was there before our desire to actually engage and interact with it. It's not something that's discovered. It's something that's always been there. And that we are just on the pathway of learning what that thing is. And if it stops with you, if the engagement stops with you, then that's appropriation.
Yeah, and I also, often encourage people to connect with their own culture. Do your genealogy. Understand the stories and the narratives of your family's culture, because it's rooted somewhere. It lives somewhere. Powerful. There's an ancient history that's attached to every single one of us. And because, our world is increasingly kind of this monoculture of globalism, we're really challenged. A lot of people are challenged with having been brought up in any particular traditions or with particular stories of identity, or a claim of personal identity that's rooted in one's lineage. And so it's never too late to do that work for oneself and to take the journey and to discover who we are at the deepest personal level, so that it's not necessary to take from another culture, but you're actually building your own sense of identity and culture from the inside out. With the deepest possible, your root into this world. And that, go back to the family's land, go, if we're from Ireland, go back to Ireland, see what's there. Or if there aren't those stories, to, dream and get information from the world of the sacred and pray and sit with oneself in a respectful way to see what the calling is, and then proceed carefully and with respect.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Go for it, Nina.
Well, just quickly, I just think that when you do that, you also need to pay attention. You can't cherry pick, and you need to pay attention to all of it. The good and the bad, and that also informs you. And you being the current tip of your family, if you will, have the ability to make those changes as well. We don't make change if we can't understand where we've fallen, even if it's, no matter how far back it goes. Yeah. Zena, you were going to say something.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I think we have to be mindful of how other people's cultures have been made sexy, and consumable, and I think what Barbara's saying about, retrace your own ancestral line and your own cultural and spiritual practices. I mean, I'm from the Caribbean, and my parents, my grandparents, they grew up in Christianity. Now, I can't align myself with Christianity personally, because my activist says, well, hold on a second, it was Christianity, the Bible, and the gun that colonized half the planet. So I struggle with aligning with it. However, that doesn't mean I don't look at don't look at scripture, and I find the wisdom that resides in the Bible, minus the politics, I struggle myself with having had to find a spiritual practice of my own, and I've had to do that as a child. So I've had to go on my own journey, searching and looking into other cultures where folk look like me, and obviously that made me look down the Orisha route. It made me look at the Yoruba deities. It made me look at Santeria. It made me look at so many different areas where I could feel alignment, not just with the skin color, but also with the spiritual practices that had the arts involved. So like with the music and ritual and poetry, and how the conjuring was done, how the conjuring is done, to just be part of how the conjuring is enriching life. And for me, go and do the work is what I want to say, because I had to, because it was stripped from me, So I think we have to look at the spaces where the people and the organizations and the movements that make consuming other people's culture a kind of sexy, easy, accessible thing to do. This spiritual life is hard work. It's not meant to be easy. That's the work, and that's the beauty of it, and that's where you feel the realness.
Well, I would like to echo that too. And this idea that came up in my research recently with Indigenous people here in California, including Indigenous Diaspora. So that's like people that were coming in, Indigenous people that were moving into California from other places, usually under the pressure of colonization and all kinds of horrific things happening in the rest of the world. So people come here for, safety. And so this idea of cultural appropriation has so many different facets to it. But one of the key themes that really came up is that culture is spirit. And when we're engaged with our own culture or the culture of another, that we're actually engaged with the spirit of that culture. And we're practicing it at some kind of spiritual level. And so in order to do that, we have to understand the spiritual tradition that we just, chosen to adopt or chosen to take on. And if we don't understand that tradition, we can't really honor it appropriately. And so I think that's why it's important to get back to our root, of who we are in the world, and understand our identity at a deeply personal level. So it's not necessary to take on. That's different than assimilation. Assimilation, people do that often in order to survive. They'll take on the dominant culture or an imposed culture. But cultural appropriation is a different process. It's a conscious act of taking on someone else's culture. And so I think it's important to know the difference.
I've been struggling quite a bit with this ethical dilemma, because I've been recently teaching people about the Elder Futhark runes from the Old Norse tradition, which is an ancestral line that I'm from in my Swedish ancestors. And the runes have been adopted for many generations by hate groups. And so by coming out with the runes, they're very much associated and being charged magically with ill intent by these hate groups. And so while on one level, I feel a great calling to reclaim these runes for our people, our lineage, and for all people, at the same time, I wonder from all of you, what's your insight in working with ancestral traditions that are being infused with those intentions for harm, and how would you go about working with them now?
I work a lot with symbols that I find offensive. So I think that's what you're kind of and also obviously when you started by saying that coming from a colonizer lineage, how to mine that, how to pull from that the constructive elements and the positive elements. But I think it's interesting that I think there are ways in which you can utilize, I'll call them negative images, negative iconography, and recontextualize them into constructive. I'm going to say that sitting in front of this piece of artwork, which it appears to say, "Do not enter," which would be a negative, destructive, culturally specific to America, you know, contemporary, subconscious. This is a subconscious symbol. It subconsciously says do not enter. People don't necessarily even have to recognize what the language is on it. So it's something that's deeply rooted in the subconscious as a negative icon. And then by replacing the language on it and destabilizing that relationship with negativity, that there are ways to, again, I was talking before about using a payload of empathy within a system like marketing, using marketing techniques, but replacing the payload with empathy. This would be using a negative icon and replacing the payload inside the negative icon with something constructive. So I think there are ways that that you can undermine that negativity and replace it with, you know, can build on it to take it into to different places. You know, I just, as you say it, I'm almost imagining Norse runes that they're redrawn to be plants, to be vines or something like that. You know, like those are just like the first thing, but like this idea of taking the thing that's there and taking it out of its normal context and saying, oh, here's, you know, anyway, that's what I think of when you say that, is that's exactly what I look at, is that the negativity that is baked in, the negativity that's culturally deep in the subconscious, and how to get the hooks into that and redirect it into something else.
And at baseline, I think the word destabilize is a good one, actually, because it just to reduce its potency if that's as far as you can go.
I think that's a little bit of what's happening just even with the word witch.
Yeah.
Like it immediately when you say it, like most people will tense up or cringe or, you know, have some kind of negative reaction to it. And I think in this time more than ever, it's been slowly begun to get reclaimed and to be shaped. And it's still in its shaping process of how it's trendy, but it's still kind of dark and mysterious, but everyone kind of wants to connect to it. And it's in this shaping process. So I wonder what, as witches, you envision for how, like, the witch to be held. Like, how do we envision the word witch and the energy of witch and the image of witch to be held?
I know I would love to see people understand. I'm working on my own way of getting this out into the world, and I think we are the tenders of the earth. We are we're always trying to connect to our home. We look at the world more as we're part of a worldwide community. We're part of humanity. We're part of the plants and animals. We're part of the universe. We have this particular point of view. I would love to see that be out there more. I do feel that the younger generation that I talk to a lot, you see it in I'm sorry, I'm just stuck in politics today, but you do see that in everything that's going on right now, the backlash to the repression that we've been feeling for a while. I think this is a wonderful time. We're at a tipping point to be able to put this message out. And I would like to see that happen. I would like to be part of helping create the leaders of the future, who can bring us into the place we need to be. This is a point in time where, until very recently, people didn't understand and were not connected to the rest of the world. This is a time when every person on this planet has access to everybody else on the planet to some extent. And that's a very powerful tipping point. I would like to see the I'd like to see our philosophy just move out into the world more, and find ways to make it accessible to people. You know, it's a quite a thought challenge, and something I'm quite interested in, and I'd love to hear more about what anybody else thinks about that and how to do that.
Yeah, I would love to see witches be associated with being wise people, trustworthy people, people of integrity, people who are in tune with the seasons, in tune with nature, and who carry wisdom about nature and of the seasons and of the earth, which is, as like Starhawk says, storytellers and as guides and teachers who have direct connection with source and are there to help others remember that connection as well. And, you know, you see a lot of imagery. We've seen a lot of imagery of witches with, you know, gnarly, warded, kind of this like ugly, or it's like super sexualized kind of forms. So just like real people, real, beautiful, healthy people who are here as representatives of and way showers for those who maybe have lost their way. I would love to see us seen in that light. Yeah.
One thing the thought that's come to me recently is just that what is different about our way is that we prioritize the world and our relationships with people, the interconnectivity of everything. We prioritize that. That's our focus for our paths, just generally. And it's a shift in perspective. A little bit of something I talked about yesterday was that we don't. We're not looking always to outside entities we're not praying for them to do something for us. We are creating that the energy comes from us. Because we are connected to everything, because we feel that spirit through us, universal spirit through us, we work out that way. As opposed to sitting back, asking a God to do something for us and waiting humbly for that response. You know, we're not asking; we're being part of the process, and it's a different way of looking at things, and it gives us control and it gives us responsibility. It's sometimes doesn't sound that different, but it is just a different way of looking at things, and it does give us that responsibility to make that change. So
I think witches, the notion of witches have always stood in, have been held in opposition to colonial, monotheistic, patriarchal white supremacy, right? Like you've got, they're kind of different sides of the scale. And I think that we're in a moment of seeing fissures in the facade of along with capitalism, all of those things kind of tied together. There are fissures in that facade. And I believe in a notion that it's my job as an artist to litter the ground with alternative solutions, so that when the system fails for someone, that they might find solace in reaching for this alternative solution. So you have to dream this potential future that you can then cast out on the ground that someone might stumble on. And I feel we're in a moment where there are a lot of people who are feeling the faults of the systems and are looking for potential replacements, or looking for solutions, or looking for Band-Aids to put over it or whatever they're going to do because they're afraid, because they want to hold on to their systems that have existed so long because they've gotten them to this point. And so when I think of what the concept of witches represents for me, it represents this counterpoint, and this feels like an opportunity that people may be looking to an alternative solution, and that would be one possible direction they might end up in.
Yeah. Which also means that then we also have the responsibility, if people are looking towards our community, we also have the responsibility of then living up to the best that we can present.
Yeah, and I love that idea that with this, any identity or any tradition that we adopt, there are rights and responsibilities that go with that.
Yeah.
And for me, part of reperceiving what a witch is and what witches are and what their intentions are and what our meaning and role is in the world is understanding our history and the history of witches and the history of women. And, the acknowledgement, to points that were made here in Scott, yours, that the transfer of conscious awareness from a polytheistic world, a world that was filled with many gods and many traditions where differences were respected and honored. It was okay to be different, to a monotheistic, one God Christian world, that was rooted in patriarchy. And to understand the history of witches is also acknowledging what happened to witches, and that 3 million witches were burned in Europe at the stake as part of, a Christian political tradition. And that was brought here to the United States or to North America. And then the same war was leveled against women and those who practiced the earth polytheistic ways and traditions. And so to me, part of our responsibility and part of our ethic as witches is to understand our own history and to understand what we're actually claiming. And when we do that, we can look around at the world that we're living in today and understand how the bad rap that witches have gotten and the way that we are portrayed and perceived is rooted in one kind of thought that's actually the destruction of women and the destruction and our wisdom. And so in our reclaiming of that and man witches and women witches, that, we have to understand that history and re-identify ourselves and to really look at how is that being portrayed in my life and where am I in alignment with the image that I'm portraying or those images that I'm supporting out there, which is, so for example, I have 2 sons and, in all of the holidays and Halloween and all of that, we've never had effigies of ugly witches because that was what was portrayed, by a certain set of people, not by witches themselves. And it was never our identity. It was never the way that we moved through the world in a wise woman way. And so we have never had those kind of images. Instead, we have the image of what a real witch looks like, which is a healthy, earth-loving being who is in communion and it is in a deep and sacred relationship with the natural and spirited world. That's really the core, of how I understand a witch to be in the world.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. I was thinking about the millions of women that were burned at the stake, and the whole idea that if you can't control it, it has to be ugly, and if you can't control it by attacking women for their beauty is one thing, but then to also sexualize them is another way to subjugate as well, to control through their sexuality or their sensuality. The sensual connection that women are known to have with the planet, with the earth, with Mother Nature. But also I'm thinking about the perspective of a Black woman, like the relationship between so it's like, say, voodoo, for example, it considered to be a Black magic. I mean, that kind of really jars me. But also, so that relationship with women having, witches having a relationship with black magic as well, I feel is another trope that has to be addressed. And I know for myself, my public life as a poet, sometimes I feel quite nervous about letting people know that I do tarot reading. But I want to normalize it, and I want to use the stage as a platform to say, actually, I have discovered so much sovereignty. I think that's the word we're looking at as well, Nina, when you were speaking about responsibility and ownership of your own life. It is about sovereignty and ownership of your own life, in that, you know, you're, from my personal belief, I'm part of a spiritual team. There's a team of us, and I'm not there, as you said, oh, please team, help me out with this, or please team, give me that, or please team, you know, give me courage here. Yes, those are the things I want, but I want my friends to help me with giving me courage as well, you know. So I consider myself to have sovereignty as standing alongside my spiritual team and my ancestors, because we're all doing the work to try and empower everybody on this planet to have a better relationship with the planet, to have a better connectivity with each other and with our humanness and our being here. So I think for me, I'm trying to exercise the space that I have, that I can create when I speak on Facebook, for example, or, you know, I'm still a bit shy at the moment because tarot is like 4 years for me. I've had other spiritual practice, but tarot just really came to me just very recently, in some respects, in comparison to other people who have been reading for, you know, decades. But it works for me. And the moment a couple of people knew I was a tarot reader, they said, oh, well, I'm into tarot, they would say, oh, stay away from you, because, you know, you don't know what you're inviting into your space or into the world. And I'm like, that's why it's called a gift and a craft. So I'm working at all of those, and I have to evidence that in the ethic that I have as a reader, but also talk about how it informs my artistic practice and how I am using it as a tool for cultural production. It's a medium, you know, that's why I really relate to what you were saying, Scott, you know, about how we're using our medium to normalize this, you know. People keep talking about the new normal, and I'm like, if you thought that other normal was normal, then, you know, this isn't about the new normal. This is like making it right, you know. This is about making what it means, you know, really engaging in our humanity and having a proper, grown-up relationship with it, you know. And I think which is how we can transform the perception of the witch as not being ugly or something, excuse my French, that's fuckable. You know, it's something that has a spirit that is about the connectivity to the earth and our personal power, and how we are here to help other people feel empowered as well, you know. Here you go.
Yes. Thank you, Zena. Witches on the rise. So speaking of witches on the rise, I'd love to hear from any witches that are listening in with us, if there's any questions that they would like our incredible panelists to answer. Witchcraft as activism.
Well,
what's inspired there?
Absolutely. I mean, if you believe in something and you care about something, you at some point you have to stand up for it, you know. So I can't see how. I mean, and that's going to be for everybody. Has their personal, you know, boundaries, and you also have to respect that as well. You know, people will be activists in the ways that they can be. You know, you can go out and protest, or you can go out and plant a lot of trees. You know, they do the same. They all help. So you have to find where you're comfortable with that. But absolutely, you know, this is a time. This is a tipping point right now, I think, and this is a time to stand up for for the change that we want to see in the world.
Feels like in our nature, we as witches are change makers, and we are an activity of the transcendental doing its work as nature.
Yeah.
And so when we see what motivates us, when we feel into what motivates us and what change is being called to make, we're artists in that way. We can take creative action to make that change through the craft, and it takes many, many forms.
I have a little quote here from it's a book about the philosophy of martial arts, and there's a difference between do, which is way, a path, or jutsu, which is just the physical activity of the salient feature of a way is that it's something you must physically do, not something you can simply think about or believe. It requires a conscious daily choice to act. The connotation here is one of a road or a path that you follow step by step toward a goal, which in this case is a lifestyle built on aiming for the highest levels of personal actualization. So, you know, being in the world and being part of it, feeling it, sensing it, and doing something in it is, it's an activity, it's a function. You have to be part of that and do it in the way that you can, but you have to be active in it, or it's a philosophy and it's conversation, and that's fine. But if you don't live it and it's not part of your lifestyle, then it's not, you know, it's not, you're not in the path. I hope that didn't sound judgmental, but that's you know, you have to actually participate.
I also think there's this, and I do this all the time, where it's like we want to save the world, and we have such a worldly awareness. And I think oftentimes, like what I'm doing for myself also is reeling it back into how can I help in my immediate community? Like, how is my craft affecting my immediate community? Like, who I'm talking to every day, even the person, you know, like the clerk at the grocery store. Like, how am I walking in my path, even at the grocery store at, you know, 2 p.m. tired? Like, you know, like how am I embodying it all the time, not just in ritual, or not just on solstice, for example, but really, you know, spreading the magic everywhere and every minute, even in the smallest smile to somebody that maybe needed that smile that you just didn't even know, or that magic can be very potent, even if it's small too.
And tremendously powerful. A smile is, to a stranger who needs a smile, is insanely powerful. So,
we have the question, what steps are you witches taking towards change?
Well, I think that tying right in, because I was going to say something about that last one, but this ties directly into it, is because that's what you were just saying, was smiling at a clerk is taking action towards change. And it's this, to me, the critical notion is this idea of as above, so below, that all of these things are operating. Anything you're doing is operating in a continuum of, you know, from atoms to the universe. And you finding your path in your own heart is one of those levels of operation. Finding interconnectivity within your direct community, maybe within your household, and working on that as a community. And then what about your neighborhood? Then what about your city? Then what about the country? Then what about the planet? And recognizing that this is a continuum that all interconnect, so that things that you engage at a microscopic level have macroscopic impact. And so for me, I've become very involved in LA City Council. And how can I participate at a city level? How can I inject my ideals of empathy into Los Angeles City Council? Then, you know, but then I'm also, you know, what am I wearing? What are the clothes I'm wearing? What are the statements I make with my clothes? And then I do public art. So then what is the artwork that I'm putting out into the public, but seeing them all as a continuation, a continuum of the same goal of empathy and addressing it. You know, planting your own garden, that's you know, that's personal, but has greater impact all the way up and down the line. So recognizing that even small personal activities can be seeds for larger ones, and then you can keep building on those, but that they're all interrelated.
Yeah, and I love that, and that critical point that I think we're all sharing here, which is that it's necessary to put our vision into the world. And I'm really big in my dream work, my personal dream work, and in the dream work that I do with individuals and community, in really accessing what is our vision and purpose here as it's being defined by creation and the sacred, the world of the sacred. And when we act upon that vision and bring in the process of bringing that into the world, we are able to find other people who are supporting and aligned with that vision as well. So to get really clear about what that is, because it gives us the direction and the purpose that we're really seeking right now.
Yeah, I echo that. And we all come into this world with our own unique gifts. And we know when that's true and purposeful for us, because we can feel it inside. It's like an aching. It's like a passion. It's like we just couldn't imagine living without it. And when we do it, it makes us feel alive, and it makes us feel inspired, and it inspires others. And so we each have our own special piece to share, our own special purpose. And that could come through direct action. You could be a frontline soldier on the streets. You could be an artist. You could be a teacher. You could be someone who is a dreamer and a visionary. You could be an oracle, an intuitive counselor, an herbalist, a healer. So we all have our own unique contribution. And one of the first actions we can take, if we don't know what that is yet, is to start asking ourselves and the source within us what that is. Dream on it, and you'll feel it it's like a visceral feeling in your body when you're doing it, of like this yes, and like you couldn't imagine life without it. That's when you know you're in the lane, or lane as it is.
Yeah.
I think that's great, Emakhet. Just the whole idea of being able to reconnect with the body as well. I think that's a really important thing. I think part of the change that we need to make is rehumanize. I think the system depends on us to dehumanize ourselves and each other. And I think the whole thing of sharing a smile, a genuine smile, which gives you a little dopamine hit, and the person who smiled at a little dopamine hit, you know, and so we start to really get into our bodies and realize that we are not just spirit, but we're also a bunch of chemical reactions as well, you know. So I think the way the system has us dissociating from our bodies, that we don't feel in connection with our bodies, and also we don't feel in connection with nature. So I think just to get back in tune with with how our bodies feel is also a part of the process as well. And one of the things that I'm doing myself as an artist and as a cultural developer and project maker is the Fury Project, which is how we can have a better relationship with our anger, because anger is that thing that also creates the separation. And even now, when we look at how social distancing, we can't even, everybody's suspicious of each other, and there's this sort of like underlying frustration and anger at the system and the way that the world is now. So for myself, I am creating this project called the Fury Project, which was looking at ways that we can have a better relationship with our anger, and how anger is just one of those vital life energies rooted in the base chakra, you know, fight or flight kind of thing. So that's where a spiritual practice for me starts to line up with my arts practice and my freelance practice as well. So just to look at how we can reconnect with the body and rehumanize ourselves as well is a massive part of the change that I'm trying to instigate, and use my arts practice to do that.
Thank you for that work, Zena. That's more needed than ever right now.
Yeah, it's interesting that I think part of our work as well is really grounding our practice, grounding the spiritual practice as well. I love that you did the, I really wish I was able to attend, but the whole thing of kitchen magic, I think that's beautiful, you know, just that's part of the normalizing that we need to do as well. And I think grounding it in, grounding our work in the everyday and in the body as well. I mean, I've seen some people doing some really interesting things at protests, like, you know, great big sticks of sage that they're waving at the police officers, just like to clear their energy, because, you know, as messed up as they are, they're people too, you know. They're on the wrong side, but they're people too, you know. They need their auras cleared, even if they don't know it, you know, more than anyone, even if they don't know it, you know. So I think there's different ways that we can show up, I think, for change, just as Emakhet said. Sage it away, yeah.
How do we get to world peace? Just sage our stairs. So I'm really inspired by how inspired all of you got when talking about dream and envisioning the future, because I'm very passionate about solution-oriented magic and thinking about seeing that point and then drawing ourselves or crafting ourselves forward towards it. And one of the things that we always share in our monthly circles and our full moon circles is the power of amplification when we are in circle with others and when we're sharing our dream and sharing our vision with others, and how, you know, magic allies, now we can understand what everyone is envisioning and how we can help each other or support each other or just energetically amplify that vision. So in heart of that, I would love our last question to be, what is your vision for the future of the universe, of the world? Just an easy little one to finish off on.
I mean, I can start by saying that I believe in the goodness of people. So I think that, you know, I think pushed down to the bottom, we will always bounce back up to that, you know, to goodwill. And it does seem that as bad as things can get, there's always people just naturally connect back to what it means to be a human being, even if that has been washed away for a while. So I do have hope. Anyway, it's a little thing to start off everyone else with.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful baseline. Thank you.
Yeah, when I just asked to be shown, you know, what comes forward, is actually a few dream memories that I've had recently. I had incubated a dream asking about a romantic relationship. And as I was working through the dream material in the dream about this romantic relationship, I was becoming more and more lucid and realizing, like, why am I asking about this when I could lend my dreams to any question? Like, there's so many important things. And right when that happened, this whole herd of buffalo comes storming through my dream, just thundering through. And I'm like, oh my God, look at what's happening in the world right now. And here I am, like, what do I do about my boyfriend? You know, so there's this whole new pivoting that I'm having also in lending my dreams to the collective vision and kind of asking for the collective, like, dream makers, show me, you know, what can I do to benefit the world, or what does that world look like? So recently I asked for a dream about this question, you know, what is a vision of a healthy world look like? And the dream that I received was so beautiful. What I dreamed was, in the dream, there's this incredibly beautiful Black mother, and she's holding a little baby in her arms. It reminds me a lot of Isis and Horus, actually, the symbolism. She's holding this little baby in her arms, and the baby is very stressed out. There's very sensitive to the environment, and because there's loud sounds and things happening in their environment where they don't feel safe. And the mother starts to sing to them, and she's running her hand up and down the baby infant's spine. And as she's doing that, the baby gets more and more relaxed. And speaking of smiles, the baby lets out this smile that I'll always remember. It was the most innocent, pure, peaceful joy that I've ever been able to witness. And I told the mother in the dream, I tell her, thank you so much for showing me this and for allowing me to witness this kind of innocence and this kind of peace and this kind of joy. And when I awoke, I realized that my vision for this world is that we can all experience that level of peace and safety and innocence, that peace and prosperity, and to feel that support, to be held in that way by the mother, of that pure support of just being able to, because I think we're all so in our fight or flight trauma. Our sympathetic nervous system is so turned on in this world. And so beyond the conditions, which there are a lot that I could go into about what I could see happening in order to create an environment in which we can feel safe to feel that, I really desire and am holding space for that feeling of safety, safe spaces to sleep, plenty of food to eat, and safety to be in our innocence. Safety to be in that pure innocence and peace, to allow that smile to just come over our whole body and just kind of rest into the arms of the supportive mother. It's just the most wonderful medicine. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that dream, Emakhet.
Yeah.
I dovetail on that, and so I'll keep writing in that direction, which is this notion of overwhelmed, that our culture is designed to alienate us from ourselves, and that lack is a primary driver of our culture. And so then how to exactly what you were saying, how to soothe that, how to replace that, how to replace those notions of fear. And for me, that comes down to empathy. So empathy becomes my recurring goal, and empathy not only for the other, and not only for say my ancestors, talking about being a product of colonialism, how do I find empathy for my ancestors? How do I find empathy to go all the way back through my DNA? And then empathy for myself. And the empathy for myself is where I then start finding that soothing, that I'm okay, everything's gonna be okay. How can I be the source of, that mother that was stroking the baby, how can I be that source to myself? Mm-hmm. How I have this spotlight, we all have this spotlight of compassion that we shine on those around us and let them know how loved they are and how important they are, and we lift them up. And there's a massive breakthrough that occurs when you realize you can take that spotlight and not only shine it on that person next to you, but you can spin it around and you can shine that loving compassion on yourself. That's a revolutionary, that's a breakthrough concept, and it's completely revolutionary and completely dissolves the mechanisms of marketing and capitalism that we're surrounded by. And when I look at what, how does one implement their vision into reality, that's what my journeys are. When I ask my dreams, I'm asking my dreams for how do I implement in tangible ways? How do I communicate this out of myself, out into others' perception? That is the goal. And then, that takes its form in a multitude of different ways, but that's my process.
I kind of think about patience. I would like to, I don't know what's going to happen in 10, 5, 20 years, but I know what I can envisage for tomorrow is patience. I just think we have to be extremely patient with ourselves at the moment. And I think I would want that for the future, is that we are here and we're learning and we don't know everything, and we let go of the idea that we should know everything, and that we allow our intuition to guide us a little bit more, which means we have to be silent, stop talking, do some more listening, and have patience with ourselves and have patience with others. If someone doesn't know, it's okay, you know, to not know, and not to release judgment as well. And I think for me, the safety that you're talking about comes, I think, through validation, that it's okay. Scott, I'm pointing at you, so it's like, it's okay. So I think there's an interconnectedness there in everything that we're saying. Yeah. And there's just something about patience and listening, you know, practicing active listening and being patient to allow yourself to comprehend what that person either is going through and how it impacts you as well. And I just think there's the act and the process of learning is part of the being I was talking about earlier. That, you know, we watch how animals learn their environment. You know, they go out and they're scouting, they're learning the lay of the land, and I think that's what we need to be doing, is learning the lay of the land that we are coming into right now, and being patient with ourselves when we don't know, and being patient with others when they don't know. So. And we've got time. I don't know what the rush is. We've gone on this kind of, everything's speeded up. We have to know now. We have to know now. We have to know now. Everything's convenient, and I'm just like, whoa. I'm all for go slow. I'm part of the go slow movement. You know, let's just slow it all down. So if I wanted anything for the future, is that we slow down, a bit more patience with each other and with ourselves, and accept that we're just learning. We're toddlers on this planet. Toddlers. We've been here half an hour. In comparison to crocodiles, we've been here for millions of years, you know. So, you know.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Grace. My vision includes having each person in this world have at least one person that they can speak their dreams to. You know, a dream confidant, someone that can accompany us with our dreams as we cross that threshold of reimagining the next paradigm and the paradigm that we're entering into. Understanding that this is a critical point. We are at a critical juncture, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think we're at a critical beginning. And to be sourcing something that is vastly more complex and intelligent and creative, with, you know, I think of a dream as, you know, like, we can't come up with this stuff all on our own. We are inspired by something that is so vast and so great. And if we are in relationship with that at a daily level, and really working with our dreams and acknowledging them and bringing them into the world, we understand our purpose. We understand our value. We understand the meaning of our life. And if we can get back to that place as original source, it's like coming home to the self. It's like rerouting ourselves and regrounding ourselves in a truly human reality, which is a natural reality. So with the vastness of how much has been constructed around us and the constructed reality, if we can get back to a natural human reality, then we understand where we're going, and we understand where we've been. And we understand now that we can create something entirely new that's based on shared values. And so I start my visioning, say, like 20 or 25 years from now, and then I step back into my present moment. So it's not about going here and what are all the things that I need, you know, that I can't possibly conceive of. If I can keep my vision of the world as one rooted in love and natural reality, And then I can begin each day to step toward that reality and construct that reality in relationship with primary reality, which is the world of the sacred and primary knowledge. So that's my jam.
I'm all about all your jams. It's so beautiful to hear each one of your visions, because it really puts it very clearly into perspective that in order to make a whole fabric, we need each thread interwoven, coming together to make a nice, strong, sturdy blanket of the world. So thank you for reminding me of that unity is the number one thing, and not just unity with each other as a tribe, but unity with the planet, and coming back to our, like what you were saying, Barbara, our natural place as humans, as being a part of this huge play that we're all playing. So thank you so much for lending us your dreams and your visions and your hearts and your wisdom and your grace. I'm in awe of all of you always. So thank you so much for showing up and sharing today.
Thank you. It's been beautiful.
Thank you, Raquel.
Thank you for putting this all together.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful.
It's hard not to when you know people like you guys. Like, okay, we need to get all in one room.
Yeah. I hope we can find ourselves in a shared space sometime soon.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Well, Witch Camp 2021, we would love to invite all of you in person for a Witch Ethics 2 panel discussion. And this is all part of Virtual Witch Camp. You can find more information at modernwitchmovement.com. And if you would like any more information from any of these incredible leaders that are here today, please feel free to reach out, and you'll see on the scroll underneath is everybody's information. But if you can't catch it, reach out to us so that we can connect you to these incredible people. Thank you so much. Have a blessed Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.